Welcome to the Catalyst for Growth podcast, a place where we talk about everything under the sun regarding the journey of the professional salesperson. Welcome the host of the C4G Sales Success podcast, John Kailunas II. Take it away, big guy.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to catalystforgrowth.org. That's our website. You can check us out there. But we're in our podcast today with David Christie. Welcome, David.
Good to be with you, John.
We were talking a little bit before we started here about David and I have known each other since 2013. And David and I are constantly sharing ideas and philosophies. And I thought in the early stages of our podcast here at Catalyst for Growth, he'd be a perfect one to share ideas with you to increase your ability to get better each and every day. So welcome, David. Glad to have you. We're here in the lovely Vegas content studio. So we're big league. We're in Vegas shooting a podcast.
We made it.
Is that the definition of making it?
I think it is for me.
Well, I think the definition of making it is being able to pay for the podcast studio.
Oh, let's work on
which we haven't done yet.
Let's work on that.
Do they have a returnable bottle tax here in Vegas?
A deposit?
Yeah.
Let's check on that.
Yeah, might need to get a lot. So tell us a little bit about your background. Tell the audience about it.
Yeah. Well, John, I've known you, like you said, since 2013. But prior to that, I've been involved in financial services and originally kind of on the sales side. Before I got into financial services, I got a chance to work for a couple different leadership development organizations.
My favorite is
the John Maxwell Company. Yeah.
Yeah. You work for Maxwell.
Yep.
That's pretty exciting.
I had an opportunity to work with John, and then I had a chance to work with one of really his key lieutenants named Dr. Tim Elmore. And that really shaped kind of my early part of my leadership journey.
Do you still go back when you're looking at creative items? Because you public speak for a major company. I don't know if you want to do a plug for that company, but you can anytime during the podcast. But do you get your creative idea? Do you go back to the days of Maxwell and that to get your creative inspiration?
Oh, absolutely. And in fact, I mean, today we're going to be talking about storytelling. So much of that was kind of sewn into me early on. So some of those stories, as you know, are perennial, that the event might happen one time, but the story can live on forever. So there's a lot that I go back to.
Well, I think that's how events do live on, right? If you look at some of the greatest stories told, which would probably be the Bible, right? Those events happen and we tell those stories over and over again. And sometimes they're told with great quality and order like yourself, or sometimes they're just written or just read and there isn't that feeling and that passion in it. So why is storytelling so important to you? And why do you think it's appropriate in professional sales?
Oh, such a good question. Storytelling.
That's
to
why
me,
I'm sitting here.
Is that why you're in that chair?
I ask good questions.
That's how it works. Storytelling is the glue that holds ideas together and helps them live on. I always like to think of it like a good story is like a thumbtack to an idea that kind of can stick into your brain. And
I like that.
Yeah. Part of why I love storytelling so much is that stories, first of all, they harken back to the earliest stages of our development. I mean, I don't know if you can remember back to when you were a child.
Oh, ageism. That's funny. That'll play well in court. You got to remember this. We're not at a bar having a drink or a cigar like we normally are.
That's
true.
Actually,
this is taped.
That comes
and
after.
that is Exhibit A, by the way.
If you can remember back, you may have asked one of your parents to tell you a story. And then maybe you ask them to tell you that story again and again and again. And it's because from our earliest points of life, stories are what helped us make sense of the world. And so I can recite a bunch of facts and figures in front of a room full of, say, financial professionals, but one story, well-placed, well-intentioned, can communicate a whole host of objectives to an audience.
Well, I think that goes back to you always remember how you feel during a point in time. And a story is easy to connect that. Whereas a standard deviation, beta or alpha, people don't remember that. But what they do remember is they remember how they feel in your presence and how when they left, they felt about you. And if trust is a major component in professional sales, that you're likable and people trust you, being able to tell a good story, even if it's your own story or your company's story, is very important.
I think about the hundreds, if not thousands, of financial professionals that you've had an opportunity to coach and to mentor. And as I've watched you work with them, I've noticed that you will oftentimes be able to relate somebody's current situation to something you've already seen. And it's kind of like that old, you and I have talked about this a lot. It's that old sales tactic, if you will, feel, felt, found. I know exactly how you feel. I know exactly how you feel. Many others have felt the same way until they found out that. That's nothing more than a 3-act story right there that helps communicate to someone that A, you're not alone, and B, if I can relate it back to something from the past, maybe I can help you with your future.
I also like to use stories in the sales process, like analogies, to take complex ideas and make them simple.
Yeah.
So it's easy instead of getting it, and we get into jargon, and we have to, right? Compliance. There's certain things that we have to say by law to represent ourselves and our companies properly. But a good analogy and a story of trying to make it so the client or the prospect can touch it and grab it, I think is very powerful.
Yeah, you hit on something there. John Maxwell, my old mentor, he used to say, you have to put the cookies on the lower shelf so everybody can get some. And
is it a fat joke now?
One of the earlier, it's just a fat observation, John, is all it is.
Thanks, David.
No, it's, and I'm speaking as a former fat guy. Okay. No, you do have to put the cookies on the lower shelf. You got to make it accessible for everybody. Talking about analogies, one of the first things that I remember working in financial services, my boss came to me and she said, David, I need you to go to a very large firm. In fact, if I told you the name of the firm, everybody would know the firm. She said, I need you to go to this very large firm and I need you to talk to them about some of these newer products that have come up in the annuity space. And she said, it's not just enough to tell them how these products have changed. You've got to come up with a story that can help communicate this. And I remember as a young wholesaler, thinking, okay, I got this covered. I can totally do this. And then I did what probably every self-respecting wholesaler does at one point in their life or another. I procrastinated. In fact, I procrastinated like a pro, thinking that I would get my story, how I'd open up this meeting of over 300 financial professionals. And I remember, the weeks turned into days, turned into hours, and now I've got to get on the airplane and go to this large meeting. And I remember getting on the airplane, not having my story ready, thinking when I land, I've got to go to this venue and I've got to speak and I've got to figure out a way to open up this meeting. And as luck would have it, as I sat down in the Southwest Airlines seat and I looked at the magazine in front of me, just out of desperation, I grabbed that magazine and just started flipping through the magazine to try to find something that would give me an idea. And I came across this story of how the tin can came to be invented. Have you ever heard the story of how the tin can came to be?
You've told me this. This is a great. So share it with the audience because this is great stuff.
I will. Or you could just act like you didn't know it.
Okay, I didn't know it. Let's see. I like that. Now I'm not only a podcast host, but I'm an actor now.
I like that story better. So I open. I'm reading.
Just create the story any way you want.
I'll do it.
Don't let the facts get in the manner of a good story.
The year was the 1850s. There was a French baker named Nicholas Appertz who was sick and tired of all of the ingredients in his jars and bottles spoiling. And he was losing time. He was growing in headache and he was losing money. At the same time, Napoleon had issued a request of everybody in the countryside asking the people, are there better ways that we can feed the troops because the troops are starving in the fields? And so Appertz has an idea. He thinks to himself, I can take this piece of tin in the corner of his workshop. He can fashion it into a jar. He can seal it, or a jar-like, structure, because he was familiar with jars. He can seal it. He can boil it. He'd solve the problem. So he starts doing this. And one by one, all the other chefs and bakers in this part of Paris came over to him. And I'll ask audiences this now all over the country. How long do you think it took for the other chefs and bakers to mimic the idea and run with it? And I'll have people guess all kinds of things. They'll say, it took 3 hours, took a day, took 2 days. I'll remind people this was before Instagram stories, or this was before YouTube. Yeah, before the internet. Ideas didn't spread as quickly as they do today. And people will guess all kinds of things, and I'll break the news to them that it was longer than a day, a week, a month, even a year, longer than 10 years, 15 years, 25 years, 30 years, 40 years, 50 years after Apritz comes up with this idea, the idea takes off. And I'll ask people, why do you think it took 50 years? And most people don't have an answer. And I'll break it to them that for the first 50 years after Apritz invented the tin can, nobody had bothered to invent a can opener. So how would you open a can without a can opener?
A rock.
Right? Rock, scissors was something. Would that be very clean?
No.
Or hygienic?
No.
Or
and
even fun?
And you'd lose all the content, most likely.
You would. 50 years later, another guy comes on the scene with a chisel and a lever. And John, guess who they called the father of modern canning? The guy who figured out how to get what was inside out. And so as I'm up in front of this very large group, I remember telling this story, explaining to them how, in this case, annuities, or you can pick whatever solution you're talking about. Annuities are like the can opener to the can, where when these products came out many, many years ago, sometimes they were hard to decipher. In fact, you'll talk to people and they'll say, I'm not interested in one of those because my uncle had one. It didn't work out for him. Or if I die, doesn't the insurance company keep all the money? Well, no. 50 years later, we've almost got the can opener to the can. And that helped paint the story. And one more point on this. When I finished, I had a woman come up to me. She was from Mason City, Iowa. She said, I love that story. I've never heard annuities described that way. She said, I'm going to go out and I'm going to get a can and a can opener. I'm going to tell the story. And I thought to myself, no, you're not. Nobody does that. And sure enough, I saw her a year later. She said, anytime somebody comes into my office and they're hesitant to even hear about what we can offer, she says, let me tell you a story about a tin can. And that's just a simple example of how an analogy, a little bit of a metaphor, can help paint the picture in somebody's mind.
Yeah, I want to take that idea a step further. So we've got a book coming out. It's called Mission Retirement. And it really looks at things from a very high level, from a prospect or a client's viewpoint of what retirement should be, right? Fidelity's done this big study and shows if you have purpose in your retirement, you live longer, right? Most people say, I want to play golf. I want to do this. They don't really have a plan. So we've written 12 steps on how to do that. And you can get the book on our website, which is catalystforgrowth.org. But that's what I think advisors should do. They should they should be the can opener and explain what retirement is and how it should work, where the products really are the can. We should be focused in on the end goal for the prospect and talking about your process. Products are irrelevant, right? We all need to sell products, right? If you're an insurance guy, you need to sell more life. You need to sell more annuities. If you're AUM, you need to sell more AUM, right? If you're a stock jockey, you need to sell more individual positions. We've all got to sell more. That's how our industry is monetized. But we focus on the wrong thing. We should focus on the can opener, which in this analogy, as I see it and hear it, would be the retirement goals, and look at absolute performance over the individual tin can.
If you would like to be a guest on the C4G podcast, please contact us at info@catalystforgrowth.org or 813-454-0557. Primetime players only. Bring your A game or don't contact us.
So key. It's the old story of the drill bit company president, right? Who listened to all his executives talk about how wonderful their drill bits were. And finally, at the very end of the speech of all these other people, he got up and he said, these are all great speeches on drill bits, but the market isn't for drill bits. The market is for holes. And the better way you find to make a hole, the drill bit will become obsolete.
And I want to take that analogy one step further in the modern day and say what is the purpose of the hole?
Ooh.
So yeah, we need the hole. The drill bit makes a hole, right? That's the tool that makes the hole. But why are we creating a hole? What goes in the hole?
Good point.
Is it electrical wires? Is it what is it? Is it a plant? What is it? And I think we need to focus in on that. And if we can tell a story to help somebody visualize what goes in that hole or what is going to be in the can once we open it, how things are going to be better and how they're going to be intertwined in our individual lives, I think it'd be very powerful. Very powerful. You and I talked about this earlier today, that information is everywhere. I mean, you can go on your smartphone, right? You get more information than any other time in human history.
Mm-hmm.
Information is free. It's worth nothing now. 20 years ago, 30 years ago, as being an independent financial professional, we always got hit with, well, you don't have research. You don't have somebody doing research for you. Well, now I can buy Goldman Sachs research. I can buy anybody's research. Yeah. So it's the interpretation of that research that is value to the clients. A client can go to Vanguard and invest direct, right? The custodians are trying to take, our business and go direct. They'll give them a $600 bonus to go direct and not use a financial advisor. So the financial advisor, and the purpose of this particular podcast is for the advisors to change their perception, to figure out what goes in the hole and quit selling a drill bit or the hole, to figure out the purpose of the hole. It's
a huge realization once you can make that leap, without a doubt.
Yeah. And I've struggled with it. And because I was trained 30 years ago under, Tom Wolfe, financial needs analysis, and the Xerox training school and all of that, I still go back to some of those product, because it's just hardwired to me. If someone gives me an objection that they have another advisor, first thing that comes to my mind is what was hardwired to me 35 years ago. And it's this line, David, I'm sure you would agree that not any individual could have a cornerstone on all good ideas. So why don't you allow us to give you a second opinion? That just comes out. And yes, that's a good little transition, or it gives you time, but it doesn't really get you to where you want to be. We were laughing about the RFK came out and was talking about Kamala Harris, and was talking about all you've got to do if you're ever stuck is, what is it, 7 little words? I'm from the middle class, right. And how funny that is, because that's how she starts. I was raised in the middle class. We all have those sort of levers that we fall back onto, that we switch to in a transactional sales mode. And I think the true professional is going to be moving past that.
Yeah, transcend that. Transcend the transactional.
What do you see in your career? You've been doing this a while. I mean, now you teach people, you speak in front of large groups. I know you've just been in front, you're just coming from DC, and where else were you this week?
Pittsburgh.
Talking to large groups, not affiliated with our broker-dealer RIA, but quality groups. What are you seeing different in today's world than you did when we met in 2013? It's been almost, a little over 10 years. Yeah.
I think first thing goes back to how ubiquitous information is.
Ubiquitous.
Ubiquitous.
See, this is when you go to Pepperdine.
Yeah.
You get words like that.
You pay for the
view. I went to a state school, so
they give you a thesaurus when you enroll.
Is it? That's nice.
Do you know what a thesaurus is?
Yes.
I'll give you another word for it later.
You want to spell it for me too?
That'll be a dictionary.
But no, do you want to spell it for me?
Yeah,
there's a hidden shot there.
That'll be on the deleted footage.
There's a hidden shot. No,
I think I heard Dr. Tim Elmore say this not too long ago. He said, this is the first generation where kids do not need their parents for information. It used to be we needed our parents for information. He said, now more than ever, what our parents need to do for us, if you're a child, is you need help with interpretation, because information is ubiquitous.
So let's take that back to storytelling, because I know like your uncle is a huge person in your life, and I've had just by the good grace, I've gotten to meet your uncle and your aunties passed. Incredible people. And it was a blessing that I got to spend some time with them. So he would tell you things maybe about your family. He would tell you things about your culture and how things worked, and it was passed to you.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that is going to, that storytelling, generational storytelling, is going to continue in the same manner that it has in the past throughout history. And what are we going to lose as a society?
You know what I think is coming back with that? I think we're seeing a return to the desire to have grit. So as you're talking about my uncle, the stories he helps communicate to me are stories of the days when he came to America with a few dollars in his pocket, the proverbial story that you hear in the 60s, and how he had to depend on his own self-reliance and grit to get through. It's those stories of grit, when he shares them with me today, that allow me to understand that I can go farther and further than I've been. Can I tell you one quick story that he told me recently that he reminded me of, that I remember him telling me when I was 12 or 13? This made an indelible etch in my mind. He was explaining to me when he came to the United States, he couldn't get a job working for any other job besides the Indian government because he was on an Indian student visa. And so the only job that he could get two jobs. One was he started working as a massage therapist and got trained to do that. But the second is he worked for the Indian Tourism Office, working as a messenger boy. And he said between those two jobs, he was able to pay his tuition at NYU. And he said one day his boss came into the big room where all the students were and said, "Does anybody here know how to speak Sanskrit?" And nobody raised their hand. Well, my uncle raised his hand. He said, I can speak Sanskrit. He said, "What do you need?" He said, "Well, we have a letter here that's been sent." This is years before Google Translate. Mm-hmm. He said, or Siri. He said, "We've got this letter that needs to be translated. Could you please translate it? It needs to be sent off to the consulate in the morning, and it's written in Sanskrit." So my uncle said, "Sure, no problem. I can do it." Takes the letter, walks away. And as he's telling me this story, he looked at me when I was 12 or 13 years old. He said, "David, do you believe that I knew how to speak Sanskrit?" And I said, "I don't know. You tell me." And he said, "I didn't know how to speak Sanskrit." He said, "I took that letter and I walked out to the New York City Public Library and I spent all night translating from Sanskrit to Hindi, to English. And by the morning, I was able to come back with that letter." And he said, "Sometimes, David, you just have to find a way to get the job done. Say yes and then figure it out as you go." And that stuck with me, John. So this idea that stories kind of live on forever, the stories that my uncle shares with me gives me a completely new vision of what I can do with my life.
Yeah. And let me challenge you on that a little bit, because I think some people listening will hear "fake it till you make it." And that's not really what we're talking about.
No.
We're talking about a different level, because faking it till you making it isn't getting you better.
Right.
It's taking care of the symptom. It's not addressing the disease.
I've actually heard it said recently, it's fake it till you make it is out. Face it till you make it is in.
I think just that right there is a nugget in this podcast that if professional salespeople take it, they're going to be a lot better off, because we're not seeing the grit or the hard nose. There was no way I wasn't going to succeed. And I was undercapitalized in building the firm. I wasn't the smartest guy. I wasn't the best looking guy. I had nothing going for me except for my desire to create the firm, because everybody I ran across said we couldn't do it. That was the greatest motivation I had. Just tell me I can't do something, and then get the hell out of my way, because I'm going to do it. And I don't think we have a lot of that. But let's get back to storytelling, because that's a whole other, we're going to go down a rabbit hole, which is sort of fun when you have a podcast here, when you're talking to a buddy, because you and I know each other very well. Why isn't the art of storytelling used in professional sales? Because you are going through and you're training so many people, and you're training top professionals, and yet they do not have this skill set mastered.
I think...
And let me go back, because when you first started talking about storytelling, I was there in one of your first presentations. And now that I see it, it's so masterful. I mean, I've seen you do that presentation you do 20 times.
Yeah.
And it is so much better now than it was, because you've worked so hard at it. And you wanted to master this and be known as a master storyteller in the financial service space. Why aren't more people determined to use this skill to get their clients because we're paid to educate clients, and we're paid to get absolute performance. By absolute performance, I mean we're getting paid for them to attain their goals. The client doesn't care really what products they buy or how they use it. They care that they can get the retirement that they want, that they're safe. Right. That what they dreamed and what they envisioned is going to come true, and that they're not living in their kid's basement. So we use all our tools, all our knowledge, right, to get them there. The client only cares about the end result. Right.
100%.
So with all that being said, and assuming that you agree with all of that, and the listening audience does, storytelling would be a great way to get that client there. And why isn't he used more?
Well, that's a great question. When I worked for Maxwell, he wrote a book called Everybody Communicates, Few Connect. It's one of the best communication books I've ever read. And aren't we always communicating in our business, John? But are we always connecting is the question. And I think,
are we not connecting because the messaging's wrong, or that the messaging, or people aren't listening because the messaging isn't compelling?
I think we're not connecting because we're not putting, it really comes down to empathy. You know, the working definition of empathy that I like, you and I've talked about this a lot, is the ability to put yourself into somebody else's shoes. And what's the number one rule of public speaking? The number one rule of public speaking from Speech Class 101 is know your audience. How many speakers do you watch?
Let me interrupt. The FCC says the number one rule is know your client. Right? We all learn that at being a fiduciary, you're supposed to know your client.
Know your client.
And being empathetic. And here's the other thing, and I want to interrupt because I know where you're going with this. We've had this conversation many times. The other thing before I forget is if you're in a niche market and you're an advisor, you have empathy because you are going to work with that type of client over and over again. Yeah. We have gentlemen that work in the unions, right? He knows his clients inside and out. They have the same similar goals, dreams, aspirations, same retirement plan, and he knows how to work with them to get them there, and he's very successful. Yeah. But niche marketing helps you develop empathy because you're seeing that same type of prospect over and over again, and you can find out what not only the drill bit, the hole, but also what the hole's used for.
And to add to that, the thing is, even though you've seen perhaps the same type of client, is the ability to look at every new client with fresh eyes. Because everybody has their own set of circumstances and issues that they come to the table with. Getting back to this idea of not just communicating, but connecting. When you make I'll give you an example. Even speaking in front of a large room, or even if let's say you're in a seminar setting in front of a smaller group. I've been in situations where I've watched great speakers before they get up to the platform. Maybe there's a break before they get up there. They will take the time to shake hands with the first 2 or 3 or 4 rows in the audience. And that's not to necessarily get them on their side, although you're going to get them on your side by doing that. It's to make sure you're making a connection with the people that you can see, and to never lose sight that you're here. The purpose of every talk, motivational, persuasive, informative, is that when you're done, what does the audience get up and what do they go do? If you're doing your job and connecting with people as you communicate with them, you'll never lose that battle.
C4G is a service-disabled, veteran-owned business. Thank you, Deborah. And all those that have served our great country. You can contact C4G at info@catalystforgrowth.org or call us at 813-454-0557.
You know, Kevin Burwell talks about he's created this bio process, and a lot of this bio is really creating that void between what the prospect or client thinks.
You're talking about a written bio?
Yeah.
Okay.
That he puts on the sheet, and it's not. It talks about his education and his but people always talk to him about that he raises honeybees, that he's in this type of church, that he wrestled in college. It's never about his accolades in the financial service profession, which are huge. Right. He's very accomplished. It's about the human stuff. And it's really, to your point of empathy, they connect with that and they leave with his bio. And that's what he's turned into referral talks and everything. And we've had several podcasts on it. You can go back and go to catalystforgrowth.org and find those podcasts, the bio podcast. But it's what you're saying. It's that connection. And he does it a little differently. He's still shaking hands and talking to people. But when they're sitting down, they're reading about his family. They're reading about that he raises honeybees. And, it's like, how did he get it? It's always something that is in that bio and the way he created it. And we do that for people at Catalyst for Growth. You can hire us to do that. We create that bio that gives people an impression, but it also creates empathy that you're like-minded. That there is not only with empathy, but that you're also like-minded individuals. So it does a whole bunch of different things. But empathy is one of the things that people just understand you a little bit better, and they trust that you understand them a little bit better because you're like-minded. What are the problems with storytelling. So you're going to teach me how to, be a storyteller, and I'm not really good at it, right? It's a skill that I haven't developed, and you have the patience of Job. You will work through people with doing that. But what are the big mistakes you see? The top 3 mistakes you see when someone hires you to help them with storytelling, or you see them speak? Because I see a lot of problems with storytellers. I see the number one, that it's not connected, that the story isn't relevant. It's not connected. It's not interesting enough. It's not delivered properly. That's what I see, but I'm not as well trained as you are in this.
I think the first thing is you come into first making the statement, hey, I want to become a better storyteller. I want to work on that. Many times, and I've worked with several financial advisors kind of in your end of the world, there's one question I ask every single one of them on our first phone call. When they reach out to me and say, I've got to go do a workshop or a seminar, David, can you please help me get ready for the seminar? John, do you know what the very first question I ask them is?
Tell me.
How transparent would you like me to be with you?
That's a very dangerous question if you're not secure in who you are.
I've had some people actually tell me, ooh, be easy on me, because it's going to be tough for me to hear. I've had other people say, be as transparent as you possibly can because I'm here for the help. I forgot
where I was. I was public speaking, and I asked you to critique it, and you slaughtered me. And rightly so. I mean, you just that wasn't good. You didn't prepare. I mean, you came down on me like a lightning bolt. And I asked you to.
Yeah.
And you did exactly what I asked, and you were right. And I go back to that moment thinking I never want to be critiqued by somebody that I respect and care and love. I don't ever want to be, it's the audience is coming to me here to speak. I better be prepared in some form or fashion, because I don't want to let people down. And you put that into me, because I was looking at it's a task. I'm the CEO of a firm, so I've got 14 things to do in a day.
Yeah.
I got to go deliver this thing.
Yeah.
And I didn't give my best. And you were like, I was like, David, how'd I do? And you were like, you were horrible.
Well, you know what, John, I remember that day, and people are not necessarily looking for a sage on the stage as much as they're looking for a guide on the side. And
say that one more time. That's powerful.
People are not necessarily looking for a sage on the stage, even though a sage on the stage is nice. They're looking for a guide on the side. And I always tell folks, especially people who hire me.
That's a great line. I've never heard you say that.
People who I've saved the best for you for this.
Well, a listening audience appreciates it.
People who've heard me say that, I'll remind them when I come in to help you become better, I'm that really good friend of yours that goes to a party and lets you know you have broccoli in your teeth. Because I don't want anybody else to see it. I want you to know that it's there, and I'm there to tell you. If you can't trust me to tell you that, then who can you trust? So that's the first thing. So when you ask me issues with storytellers and storytelling,
how often when you go into that and you ask that question, do people think they want to hear the truth, and then when you deliver it, they back off? Because you don't go back to I'm sort of a dumbass. I go back when I burn my hand in the soda. I go back a couple more times. So after I bombed it, or at least I could have done better on that.
You're not
talk.
Alone there. Yeah.
I go back, and then I'm David, how do you do? Oh, much better. You should do this. You should do that.
Right.
So you've helped me with that. How often do people burn themselves and then don't come back? I can see that a lot in our profession.
You know what's interesting is over the last several years, I've had an opportunity to work with exclusively groups of women advisors in our business. And I find that most men will right away tell me, be as transparent as you want me to be. And the moment I begin, I get a little bit close. Whoa. I get a little close to the ego. What I found, and this isn't true for everybody, but I found with women in our industry, they'll actually say to me, no, please be honest with me. And then they actually listen. And that's the key word, is listen to the feedback and then take appropriate measures to improve. That's not saying the men don't do that.
I would say overall, women are much easier to work with and train in the financials because they're willing to learn, and their ego isn't as grand as a male advisor.
I would agree. And so
they have better listening skills.
So there's something about listening in order to become a better storyteller. The second thing is I noticed, especially in the world we live in today, leaders are readers. And you and I, we have a habit, sometimes a good habit, sometimes a bad habit of sharing books. Sometimes I've got a stack of books that you've recommended to me that I still have yet to get through. But making sure that you are reading great stories. And just like the story I told earlier about reading the Southwest Airlines magazine, you can find stories there, but stories are all around us. Do you take the time? I was listening to a speaker recently, and they said who they read a lot of nonfiction because they're in our space. But what he said was, it was Steve Harville. He said, but you have to take time to read fiction as well to get your mind into just the storyteller's arc. So that's
interesting.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have thought about that, but as you said it, it resonated with me.
Yeah. Yeah. Where you get into that storytelling arc and it becomes a little bit more familiar with you. I think the number one mistake people start making is when they want to become a better storyteller is they turn off that radar to great stories in their atmosphere that they can glean from. And I'm thinking of other areas where people fall short with storytelling. Oh, well, this one goes without saying. A lot of times you're kind of in the workshop space, but that ability to practice. My mom, when I was growing up, she used to always tell me in her way, in her accent, she would say that practice makes perfect. Practice makes perfect. And I had a mentor in my life, much later in my life, when I repeated that back to them, they said, "Oh no, David, practice doesn't make perfect. Practice makes permanent. Evaluated practice makes perfect."
One more time.
Practice doesn't make perfect. Practice makes permanent. And it's evaluated practice that makes perfect. So when I'm working one-on-one with a financial professional, I will ask them to record themselves. And before they send me the recording, I want them to watch themselves 2, 3, 4, 5 times. And I want because a lot of times what they would do is they'd record themselves. They'd send it to me. Would get on a phone call and they'd say, "All right, what did I do right? What did I do wrong?" And I'll say, "Did you watch yourself?" And they'll say, "No." I'll say, "Why didn't you want to watch yourself?" And they say, "I just don't want to watch myself. I can't even stand the sound of my own voice." And I said, "I got a news flash for you. Nobody can stand the sound of their own voice on recording." So once we get past that, how can we turn this practice makes perfect idea to practice makes permanent? And how can we get into a practice where we evaluate that practice?
There's you just took me back, and I was talking about how things were drilled into me, the sales, tracks and things like that, and overcoming objections. And it was memorize, internalize, and personalize. And that's how you were supposed to move a prospect into a client. Like you had to memorize the sales track. You had to personalize it, right? Show that empathy you were talking about. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then personalize it to them so it's pertinent to them. Because what's pertinent to you isn't necessarily pertinent to them. And you need to understand where they're coming from to solve the problem.
Back to empathy.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you think the industry is going to go in the next 5 years? Because we have rapid changes coming.
Yeah.
Where do you see it from your perch?
I believe that it's going to move much closer to high touch. A lot of people, I was just at a conference last week where they were talking about AI and AI in our business. AI is a tool, but it will never replace knee-to-knee, face-to-face contact with somebody to where you can look into their eyes and actually understand where they are coming from. So I think we're going to see this flight to technology like we've seen over the last several years, where people are going to start relying on the tools, and they're going to perhaps pretend to themselves that the tool is a substitute for human connection. But I believe we're going to see that come full circle. And the people who are going to succeed with people, the people who are going to win with people, are the ones who know how to connect. How do they connect? By having a personal relationship and by sharing a story, because that's going to tap into the most ancient parts of our brain. Those parts of our brain, John, they're never going to go away, no matter what tools are available today.
Yeah, you do a whole thing about we should have a podcast. I won't spoil it, but we have another podcast on a talk you do that would be pretty powerful here for the audience. So, all right, as we're coming in here to the end, I always ask sort of like a fun question at the end. Yeah. If you could go back in history, what event would you want to witness firsthand.
Oh, wow. I was just in Washington, D.C., and
Phenomenal city.
Yeah. And I stood at the Lincoln Memorial just yesterday, and I read the Gettysburg Address. And I think about some really, I mean, I don't know if I can boil it down to one, but I think about great speeches that have happened in the world. I'm a Ronald Reagan guy.
Yep.
So if I could go back to the Berlin Wall and watch Reagan tell Gorbachev to tear down that wall, that'd be a moment I'd like to see. If I could get back to Abraham Lincoln giving the Gettysburg Address, talking about what our country had been through, I think I'd really have liked to see that. And if I could have stood on the steps of the Washington Mall and seen Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. give the I Have a Dream speech, which, as we talk about communication and speeches, that was a speech that he had a few lines written out. And as he got to the platform, there were people in the crowd and some of the folks that were behind him that said, really give it to him, Martin. And that's where he began to extemporaneously begin to talk about the I Have a Dream.
It's a wonderful speech.
Yeah.
It's one of the greatest ones in the history of our nation.
Yeah.
And you know what's funny is that wasn't that long ago. Normally when I ask that question, people go back to biblical times or something in ancient history. And you're the first person we've had as a guest that talked about something that's relatively modern history, which is interesting.
I tell you why. I love being at live events. That's why I find myself going to conferences. There's something that happens at an event that helps spur a process after the event. And my life has been changed by being in the room when somebody says something that I maybe will never forget. So I think that's why I go back to moments, even in recent history, that will allow me to reflect. And a lot of times those are the most powerful moments that help me start a new process in my life.
I want to ask you one favor, if you could do it for the listening audience before we end this podcast. Would you do me one favor?
Sure.
That was
you
bold.
Getting a little yes
bold.
out of me. Yeah.
That was bold because I got a yes before you know what it is. Now I'm going to change what I'm going to ask of you. No, I would like you to. I know you're an avid reader, and you and I often exchange reading material. Mm-hmm. We have a section on our website which is catalystforgrowth.org. That it's what we wrote, what we read, and if you could put your top 5 books, if you go on there, I know you've been on our website before, but go on there and make sure we're not duplicating. But if you could put your 5 books that sort of transform your life, I think there's Maxwell already on there because Maxwell is, I'm always a fan of his, but if you could sort of in Atomic Habits, which you have here on the side, that's on there as well. But if you could go through and pick 5 that aren't on there and share them with the audience, I think they would really appreciate your wisdom and your willingness to share in this type of venue.
That's an easy one to say yes to, John. Absolutely. I'll do that.
Well, I should have come up with something harder.
Exactly.
How about paying dinner?
You know what? Let me think about that. I gave you your one.
Well, David, it's been a pleasure, man. I respect you. I admire you. I love you. You're a great friend, and you're a talent to this industry. And anytime we can get you here in a podcast to talk and share your wisdom with others is much appreciated.
Can I add one thing to that, John? Because I know you and I have, in the time that we've known each other, my story about growing up. I didn't have a dad growing up, and sometimes just the male voice has helped me so much. And a lot of times you will include me on email that you will send to your kids where you've got a quip or a quote, or you've got something you've read, or you've even just got a message for a Monday. It's those little things that have made such a big difference for me. And there are many books that I have, You've sent me more books in the mail, I think, than just about anybody I know. And even
that says a lot, considering you used to sell encyclopedias
door to door. So I'd like to say thank you to you for always be willing to planting those kind of mental seeds for me, because all it takes is one great idea that can help change your direction for a day. And you've been a big part of that for me. So thank you, my friend.
Well, thank you. That's why we did this podcast. This is exactly why we're doing it, is because there's so many people that helped me, and, it reached down and gave me a hand, because I shouldn't be where I'm at. I shouldn't have accomplished what we accomplished as a firm, right? The odds were stacked against us, and we just waged war and went along and did it. And it's because a lot of people helped me, and a lot of people were very giving and kind. And if I can do that to anybody, I'm playing it forward like I should. So I appreciate you. So there'll be another episode being dropped next Wednesday. Every Wednesday you're going to get these. We'll get talented people from across the industry like David Christie. You can go to www.catalystforgrowth.org and hear the next podcast next Wednesday. There's also several items on the website you can look at. They're free resources to help you build your practice, to help you find your way. It's very difficult being independent or looking to be independent, and where do you go, and sort of who's laid out the road and the journey for you. We can help you with that. The first step is going to the website. So again, thank you, David.
Thanks, John.
We'll see you next week.
Hey, thank you for your time today. We will have another content-packed session posted next week. Please check our website, catalystforgrowth.org, for our legal disclosures on the bottom of our homepage, if you're into that sort of thing.